Hey guys, here. So today I want to talk about skill gap in gaming and specifically Madden and what it means, what it should be looked forward to, and how it really should balance against, say, fun and more like, how should things be balanced, right? Versus skill gap. So the comp versus the casual, that's the big question for today. But first, let's find the answer to one of tomorrow's content, basically the news of the hour. Keanu Neal's on his way, 97 overall. A strong safety. He looks good, specifically on a theme team. His price will be nice because of the training reroll pack, so maybe wait till later on in the day or the next day to go ahead and grab him for your team if you can wait. So, now that that's done, let's go over to the main topic of today, which is the sponsor. Rock Bottom Coins is the #1 place to get your Madden 21 coins. If you make coins for my videos, sell them to Rock Bottom. If you're buying, use my code GUTBOX for 15% off. Alright, but actually, the reason why I'm talking about this today is because I saw an interesting, I will say, topic on the Madden Ultimate Team subreddit about EA bringing back the skill gap, right? He says, I'm not saying I'm a great player, but I know I'm losing to some players who have very little skill and sent Mike Blitz with one step ahead of all game. It's beyond infuriating. People can BS their ways to wins doing this. Now, how can EA make people actually learn how to create a scheme? Okay, now, the more important is not necessarily that. I think, the thing is, I love playing guys like this, right? If they send 5 and use one step against me, oh my god. With the scheme that I run right now, that's better than sex, okay? So, anyways, this guy, I think, does a really good job. And I kind of want to get back to about his opinions on what they can do. But first, I really want to talk about, what is skill gap, right? How do we determine it? And, some things kind of think about as we move into more solutions for Madden, okay? So, the difference in skill gap, right? It's the chance of winning versus somebody that's less skilled than you. Maybe that's less experienced than you, less, better than you at the game. Simple as that. That's what the skill gap is, right? So, what are the things that lessen that? RNG. A lot of people point to, games like Fortnite with their gun bloom and stuff like that as ways of lowering the skill gap. Let's go ahead and pull some packs while we're waiting, while we're talking about this stuff, right? And Madden, I think RNG, it does lessen the skill gap to an extent, right? Let's talk about, for example, like fluke, right? When your player doesn't catch the ball, that's skill gap gone away. That's awful, right? Skill gap doesn't work when it just goes through your player, or you drop the interception, your quarterback randomly misses a throw. That's bad RNG, okay? Now, RNG can't just be, gone out of the game, because we do need a little bit of it for, D-line mechanics and other things like that, right? We need that. It would be awful if every single D-lineman just auto-shed on 3 seconds, right? Brandon Cooks, I'm going to say, he's probably training value. And I think that would be bad for the game, right? So, there needs to be a little bit of randomness and how players react and how they run the routes on next gen. It's also, that's more determined by the player themselves, which I think is a great solution to it. So randomness can be good, but randomness, in games like, Magic the Gathering, which is generally thought of as a pretty good game, it happens. It's a card game, right? Poker is a game of skill, and yet it's still got a lot of randomness in it. So randomness, to an extent, is good and bad, right? On one hand, it does make the game more enjoyable versus saying just rock, paper, scissors or tic-tac-toe, which has no randomness, right? You can only play those for so long before you get bored. So, on one end, yes. On the other end, you can't really say you got to get it all out of the game for a various amount of purposes that we don't want to go into all of them in this video. So, all right. Then what else, right? Exploits. Do exploits raise or lower the skill gap? A topic that I've had a conversation with many people on, including Jemiah. We talked about it on previous times he's been on the channel. Not yesterday. I do have yesterday's Jemiah talk over in the second channel, but I will say I'm going to keep that one for now and check his price. I think exploits do lessen skill, right? If you can basically say, hey, I'm going to run Nickel Blitz 2 on you, and you now can't block it, but you got 2 seconds to get the ball off. You can only get into one formation and potentially block it, right? And that's why everybody moves over to gun bunch. You got motion and stuff. You got to do a lot of different stuff. Not only does that make the game worse because you can only run into so many formations with the kind of exploits. That's why competitive banned the J-Wall glitch. That's why they banned that franchise thing where you just run with your quarterback, you burst out of there to the right, and the defense doesn't even respond. You go hyper speed out there. So even the competitive side of Madden knows exploits make the game less skillful, right? Blocking field goals with no consequence. that is not skill gap. It is an exploit. Now, the other side that I've heard Jemiah argue is like there is a skill gap there because only certain people know how to stop those exploits. So like the skill gap, the knowledge gap of knowing how to go around those exploits is the skill itself. And that's a valid argument. The only argument I have to that is like going back to rock, paper, scissors. Like say there's rock, paper, scissors, and then nuclear option, right? Like how skillful is, oh, I'm just gonna run the nuclear option every time and I'm gonna win. It's like, well, okay, but now I need to know the counter is I gotta get MacGyver in here or his more hilarious friend MacGruber to defuse it, and then it's just like it makes no sense balance-wise. It sucks that it limits the game itself. Whereas like if there is a counter to it, and I know my guy's gonna run the nuclear option, I'm gonna like move the Earth with Superman by a few paces, and it's just like a common task that he asks you, like, hey Superman, can you get that? Yeah, sure, I got it. It's like we're way off the tracks now, but like I feel like if you have something, a game-coded option to counter it should be in the game, right? It shouldn't be exploits in the game because I think that lowers the skill gap because it makes everybody then run that same thing over and over, makes the game not only boring, but, you know, lowers it, even though some people do know the counters. So I see the argument the other way, but overall, I think exploits in the game are a bad thing. But let me know what you guys think in the comments about all this, right? Now, movement itself, right, on current versus next gen. I like the ability for left stick to kind of dominate the world, right? To be allowed, like, to use your left stick skills, I think is more dramatic because, like, the way you have to move your controller here, like, stop precisely, go precisely, hit multiple buttons in succession. Like, that's good. I think that's amazing, the movement system on current gen. Whereas next gen, they got kind of a slower thing. You basically have to input, all you have to do is, like, spam it right, spam it left, for actual game-coded, predetermined animations to try and suck the defender into animation. Whereas, like, I feel like there's more counterplay with the left stick, whereas your actual movement on the field on offense and defense can kind of overtake the other guy's movement. Now, I know there's a lot of problems with that still. Defensive pursuit is awful, but so I'm not going to kind of get into that. But overall, I feel like the actual left stick movement of me on the field versus you on the field is kind of an important thing. We're doing pretty good in these packs right now. And that's what I feel like current gen is more skill for the next gen with that. Now, I know people prefer next gen. I absolutely hate it. Wow, crazy. Back-to-back 93s. We are in a polling window at the moment. So, with that said, like, how much does actually, like, raising the skill ceiling with that, right? Like, and, like, say... Oh, actually, let's go back to that. So, how much, like, let's go on to, after the movement. Let's go to, like, you know, cards and stuff. And like, building the roster and your scheme fit. Does MUT increase the skill gap or lower the skill gap? I think MUT's pretty, you know, basically equal. Does making the game mode a little bit more complex, adding more formations, plays into it, make it more complex? Maybe that raises the skill floor where it takes you a little bit more and longer time to get into it, but not necessarily the skill ceiling, because once you're into it, you kind of know all that stuff that doesn't really, you know, add into, like, your ability to beat another player because you know more about, you know, MUT cards. But, I mean, knowing more about the formations themselves is a skill ceiling thing. But getting into the game on the MUT side of it isn't really much of a skill ceiling outside of, like, what stats do something. And I guess, like, the knowledge gap, I think, is one of the most talked about and debated things in the game, right? Does the knowledge gap mean the skill gap, right? If you know what plays to run, you're going to be a much more effective player than ones who don't, right? It's just like the NFL, right? Schemes over teams. So does the knowledge gap in MUT and what stats actually work make sense, right? Is EA not putting out, you know, I guess, telling us how things work? Does that increase the skill gap? Because, you know, you got to go out and find it. You got to go to YouTubers that test this stuff. You got to know it. You can test it yourself, etc., etc. And I will say I don't love it. It does increase kind of the skill gap because it increases the knowledge gap, but I don't love that way of increasing it at all. So, now the abilities. Do those things add or decrease skill gap too? I think it's the same thing with that, you know, knowledge gap with abilities. I think abilities themselves are fine as long as they're tuned and properly balanced. I don't think we're ever getting away from abilities because how much EA, you know, seems to love them and sell the game on superstars being superstars, which... You know what makes sense a lot? Like, you know, people say, oh, it makes more sense in regs, but in MUT, everybody's kind of a superstar. So what does it mean that, you know, this one guy, which was superstar during his era, because he got an ability, is going to dominate another's era superstar? And does that really matter? I'm not so sure, but, like, I think abilities are fine as long as they're not, you know, out of power and expletive, right? Like we talked about before. So, how much does raising the skill ceiling actually make the game better, right? Like, what if it took 20 buttons to complete a pass? Like, you had to do a Mortal Kombat code finisher to throw, then you gotta do a similar one to catch it. Sure, the skill ceiling is raised, but to what extent? Does that make the game actually worse overall? I would say yes. That sounds awful. Why would you ever put that in your game? Well, it's harder to do. So does skill have a higher skill gap mean it's inherently a better game? No, it doesn't. There's a lot of highly skilled games that are not fun. So it's along with a game balance is balancing fun versus design too. Ooh, couple 90s, I like that. So got to keep that in mind too. What does it matter, right? So I think, right, I'll go through the other guys' things and specific things that EA can do to kind of raise the skill gap yet keep the game fun. And here's what I think, right? EA needs to do a better job, first of all, after fun and getting rid of the glitches, is balancing the meta. They oftentimes kind of forget about the meta being a major important part of this game, right? When the game devolves after some of our competitive tournaments and everybody starts copying them, you know, the YouTubers who have no minds of themselves, they end up just copying comp guys, putting those videos up saying, oh, the most overpowered broken stuff ever, because they don't want to look for themselves. They just want to copy the pros because it's a lot easier and you still get the same amount of views, if not more, because their stuff actually works. So EA needs to watch the meta, right? And I judge every single Madden on TTB, time to bunch, how soon the meta switches to a gun bunch. Now this year, gun bunch was pretty popular early on. It kind of gained momentum a little bit in the middle months. Now it's basically every game is gun bunch. So the time to bunch was a pretty decent time this year, right? It took a little bit. We saw people, one of the guys that won the tournament was in trips. I don't think, you see a little bit of trips online now, but not as much as you used to, as I feel like it's a little harder a formation than that like Jets bunch that everybody's kind of running. So with that, making the meta diverse is super important. You know, it's right behind fun and bug-free gameplay in my list of importance for the game. So like EA needs to take a look at their analytics. Which plays are gaining so much yardage? What are the most used formations by like the top 10,000 players online, right? Maybe you should take a look if like, you know, 70% of them are in something. Yeah, that needs to change, right? You can't take a look at the whole online atmosphere and change the base of that because there's a lot of people who don't know what they're doing that are just kind of like calling random plays and they're not really part of the meta at like, you know, the hardcore spot of the game. So definitely something to look at. I will say it was funny watching all pro gameplay this year being less skillful than all Madden being less skillful than all pro, because in all Madden it was just, you know, one steps and, you know, a couple zones out there and the receivers were stuck to, right? They were stuck on, you know, to the corners, and it was awful, right? So like man coverage I think is one of the least skillful coverages in the game if you can just set it and forget it. But I like that man coverage right now is in the spot where, you know, you can't just set it and forget it, because guess what? There are a lot of things that can beat it, even with one step. So you have to have, you know, man. That's why I think all pro's better, because you actually have to man dudes up, and you actually have to think for all pro man coverage to kind of user and take away certain routes versus all Madden. The only downside of all pro I can see people definitely agreeing about is the ability to see the opponent's play. And I was like, okay, that's kind of, you know, lowers the skill gap a little bit in my opinion with the knowledge gap, but you should be able to see that on the field versus in the previous play. So this person's skill gap, right? What are his thoughts? Increased pressure from four-man D-line rush. I think that's an awful idea. If you have double or nothings or edge threats on right now, pressure's crazy. Pressure's great in four-man. Sometimes it gets a little slow, but some of those abilities right now really make four-man rushes insane. I will 100% agree with this though. Two-man rush, the ability for the defensive lineman to split double teams on the greatest offensive lineman of all time is ridiculous right now. There is no reason for players to be splitting offensive lineman double teams. Now I can see it if you're splitting a tight end double team, sure. But an offensive lineman, an offensive like John Hanna, who I just pulled, and I don't know, Joe Thomas, if they went against Aaron Donald would not be splitting that double team, right? J.J. Watt would not be splitting that double team. Lawrence Taylor would not be splitting that double team like they do in Madden here. Okay, it's just not realistic, right? Even Aaron Donald in the NFL against like regular pass blockers has a dang hard time splitting a double team. They will push them back 4 yards on a run. Contains need to work, 100% agree. There is no reason why contains can't fight out and stop rollout offenses, right? I think a lot of problem is like players will double the contain player, and then I should be able to blitz a guy outside my contain player, and if the contain player gets doubled, my guy should be screaming off the edge, right? That the offense screwed up, and my guy screams. But instead, the guy screams to the inside, the contain got the outside, my cornerback for some reason wants to blitz the A gap, when he should be blitzing on the edge to stop the corner rollout. So they need to do a lot of stuff better to stop players running outside the pocket. 100% agree. That needs, like, this is what I'm talking about. I think the best skill gap comes when there's plays, counter plays for the counter plays, and then it stacks up all around, right? That is the best game possible, right? So that needs to work. Fix base cover 3. Flood concepts against cover 3 should work, right? You can either stop corners or flats, or, you know, all three of them, I guess, if you Mabel coverage. You have a guy stop the corner and the flat and a deep over the top. But if you just try to cover 3, you should not be able to do it, which is, I think 21 is a significant better spot than 20 for that, where it was blitz everybody in your deep third covered every single route on the you know, flood concept. So I think cover 3 this year, I will say, allow it to get bombed 100% of the time. People should not be able to sit in one coverage on defense, brainless, and not get exploited over the top with it. That's what I call play counterplay. They should have the deep half, and then there should be deep half exploits too to take care of that, so that way people just don't sit in the same thing over and over. That's what I talk about, play counterplay, because if they rush 2, if they rush 1, the run game should dominate them. 2, there should be a way of taking the top off the defense, so that way they just can't flood the mid and short, and then user all around the middle of it too, to take away your passing game. So that's what I'm talking about. That needs to change for skill balance in the game. Continue to develop match coverages. Match coverages are, I would say, dangerous. And I think there should be one plays against match coverages, just like they are against cover 2 and 3. But I don't think it should be as consistent, beatable, because your CBs got horrible jumps. They chase the wrong stuff, right? A corner out at your corner, sitting at it, looking at it, should be able to stop a corner out there. Frequently, it's inconsistent. In some corners, depending if the quarterback rolls out, will just get open anyways. So that's awful. Like cover 3, right? That deep third for an uncovered corner route, the deep third should stop that corner, right? That's literally its assignment, okay? So the fact that they kind of back off and let them complete underneath the deep third, even though there's no clear out, there are certain corner routes where I can see it and like certain concepts 100%, but a lot of times, some of those deep corners getting into cover 3, the way they patched and changed cover 3 into basically a cover 2, it is annoying and it's awful. And, you know, it's kind of like the EA devs to kind of do that. So, match coverages, you know what I'm talking about? Like, there should be no set and forget defense. If I can call a match coverage, it stops everything, it'd be awful. But I do like that match coverages continue to get better. And smoother transitions from floor to flat. Yeah, so a lot of things need to happen with match coverages, but you know, they should be one playable and they should be beatable, but they shouldn't be beatable with stuff that they, you know, are supposed to stop. So, better user skill tackling versus ball carrier mechanic, more ball carrier moves. I don't necessarily think this is true. New tackling system animations. I don't know what he really means by that. Current gen or next gen. Current gen with pursuit and like the defenders breaking down. Like my user defender leaving my control and breaking down is awful. Right? I can see it for CPU players to break down and then tackle, but on current gen with the way ball carriers move, the breakdown mechanic just doesn't work right there. And I should never have my user control taken away by the developers. Right? If you man yourself up on the running back and you try and go run back because the running back blocks, it will literally bring you forward, and it's awful. It will give up plays that you're trying to stop because of that reason. So, you know, and also just hitting L1, right? When you have your Madden up your guy, the game just plays for you. That shouldn't be a thing either. If you don't want to play a defender, you should play a defensive lineman. If you don't want to play a linebacker, stop and go is too hard for the defense to keep up with. I think that's fair, but I think the stop and go shouldn't be changed. I think the defense needs to be updated. Don't kill man coverage, but chill. I think man coverage is perfectly fine. I don't think man coverage is a problem in all pro. All Madden 100%. All pro man coverage is very easily beatable. Make size matter for off the ball? Yes. Linemen versus safeties. Linemen should win, right? Simmons is 230-something pounds, which is probably close to the average linebacker right now. I mean, he's 6'4". But, like, you know, it's true, right? Linebackers should be the thing against the run, and safety should get dominated by it. But right now, here's the thing. You basically have to shoot the gap in the run right now to stop it effectively. If the offensive lineman gets your hands on you, there are insta-sheds, sure, and those are annoying, but it's a lot because the offensive line mechanics don't recognize blockers. We have a lot of problem with that. So there are some fixable things. What do you guys want to see skill gap-wise and how to increase Madden's skill gap while making the game more fun? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Call to action. Please like if you liked it. You know, downvote if you didn't like it. Otherwise, sub. Appreciate you guys. See you tomorrow.